we're taking a look at using Metasploit to gather hashes from the Windows systems and then store them into a local database. So getting the hashes is pretty easy. If Meterpreter shell is open, the Hashdump command dumps them right to the screen. And all the work is basically magically done by Meterpreter to get the hashes out of the local operating system. You do need privileges that are good enough to be able to get the hashes, so it's good to run a get system before to make sure that the proper account has been obtained. One of the questions you see a lot on different boards is dumping the hashes into the local database, and how is that done? Well, we can go through both ways in order to see the different options. So to get the hash dump in the first place, we need to use Metasploit to get a session on a box. So we've set up a virtual box network, and basically we've got a few machines running on it, one of which is the Backtrack 5 machine that we're operating, and the other is a Windows 2000 box that's got some patches but not enough to keep it from getting exploited. So if we go back to the Backtrack 5 box, and we can find the Windows 2000 box pretty easy. You can do an nmap or a db nmap. The difference is the db nmap results will automatically populate the Metasploit database tables. And if we do a -o, and then put in our network range, which we're going to do 56, 101 through 103, because this being a VirtualBox network, the DHCP machines are going to start at 101 and go up from there. There's only a few machines running. So it looks like one machine's already been found, and it's got port 135, 139, and 445, indicating it's some kind of a Windows box, more than likely. And Nmap believes it's a Windows 2000. So this is very likely the target, and that was at IP address 101. So the results have been dumped into the Nmap database, and the table that holds the hosts is called host, appropriately enough. So if we type in hosts, this command will actually dump the contents of the host table to the screen inside of Metasploit. Note that we're inside Metasploit Framework's MSF console. And 101, the latest version of it, is down here at 3 lines from the bottom. Now the reason that there is another 101 is this is on a different network. So notice that the third number is a .1, not a .56. So that was done on a different network scan. So in order to get the hashes off of the Windows box, we need to get a session on it. To do that, we're going to use a vulnerability. So we've already previously used Nessus to find a vulnerability, and then imported the Nessus XML, which went into the vulns table, and we can use the vulns command to list the vulnerabilities. And then essentially there's a lot of vulnerabilities, and one of them that's on here is the MS03, so we can go ahead and use that to get the session. So we're skipping a lot of steps here because the only point of this video is to show how to get the hash dump into the credentials database, and not really how to get sessions. So we'll go ahead and move pretty fast through this. So we're going to use the exploit Windows distributed computing environment RPC from 2003, and once we get that, we'll need to set the options. Show option shows that we've already got 101 in the R host, the remote host. It automatically targets port 135 with this particular exploit, and automatically sets up a listening port of 444 in the payload if you pick the Meterpreter payload. So we've chosen the Meterpreter stage with the bind TCP stager, and the target is already set at 0. That's the only option, so it would have picked that anyway. And we'll do exploit. Need to wait while Metasploit stager sends the stage over, which it's done, and it's opened up session 2. So if we do a sessions-l, we can see a list excuse me, we'll have to background this session first before we can do that. Sessions-l, we can see that session 2 is the only active session right now, and that's the session we were in. So session-i2. Excuse me, sessions, and we'll interact with session 2. So we have Meterpreter, and then if we do a help, we can see that one of the things you can do is the Hashdump command, very appropriately named, and Hashdump dumps the hashes from the Windows box. And the question seen a lot is, well, how do I actually get those into the Metasploit database without having to manually add them in one at a time by hand? So one of the easiest ways, instead of using the Hashdump built into Meterpreter itself, is to use the Hashdump post-exploitation module, which actually does the exact same thing as far as dumping the hashes, but in addition to dumping them to the screen, it automatically populates the creds table in Metasploit's database. So assuming that you have a session, and assuming that you're connected to the Metasploit database, which in recent versions is pretty much automated that you're going to connect to the database at startup, we're going to put the Meterpreter session in the background, hitting Control-Z, entering Y for yes, and enter. So we didn't kill the Meterpreter session. If we do sessions-l again, we can still see that session 2 is still there. We've just put it into the background. So now we're back at the exploit prompt for the MSO3 that we used, and we'll go ahead and back out of this, typing back. Most of the Metasploit commands are relatively obvious once you've used them a couple times. And then we'll go ahead and use post-exploitation for Windows under the gather group, and we're going to use Hashdump. And if we do a show options, because usually in Metasploit most everything works pretty much the same way, no matter the context. And we can see that the only command, or well, not command, but attribute that needs to be set that's mandatory, here it says required is yes, is the session attribute, and it's currently set to 1, and we don't want that because we know that our Meterpreter is on session 2, so we'll just go ahead and set that session to 2. And if we do show options again, we can see that the current setting is 2, so we should be good to go. And we'll type run, and we will wait while Metasploit does its magic. And it looks like that the operation failed. We may not have had system, so let's see what we do have. We'll go back into the Meterpreter session. And we'll use get UID. And basically have no explanation for why the first go around didn't work. So what we did is we just tried harder by typing in run again, and it worked the second time around. So now we'll go ahead and go into the look at the creds table, short for credentials, and so we just type in the name of the table creds and then hit enter, and it'll actually dump the contents of the credentials table, and we can see that the hashes that were found and dumped to the screen by the post-exploitation module were also automatically imported into the credentials table. And it's a pretty nice table because it not only gives the IP and the port that it came from, but it basically shows you the LAN manager and the NTLM hash side by side, and then the type. So basically, how did it get the hash, or what kind of hash is it? So now we got them into the credentials table, and one of the nice features of Metasploit database is being able to export the information. So if we do a db_export and just look at the options, most of the items and commands and different things you can do inside of Metasploit, if you put a -h after them, will show the help. And so we have a format that we can pick, and then we can also pick the file name. And the format can be XML, which dumps the host table and the services table and a whole bunch of the different tables. We can also just do a more simple password dump, and that format is very useful because it can be passed directly to John the Ripper and other tools to attempt to crack the hashes. So if we do a db export, and we're going to do format is password dump, pw dump, and we're going to export this to just root folder. We'll just call it passwords.msf. Okay, and then if we take a look in another terminal, we can take a look at that file. So we can see the format has the username in it, and then it has those hashes in it already set up. So then we can send this dump into John the Ripper tool. So we'll do John, and then we'll do the path to the file. And then for speed purposes, I've already cracked these earlier, and so it says no password hashes left to crack because it's already cracked them. And so we'll just use the John show command on that same file and see the passwords from earlier. And if you look carefully, you can still see the username and then colon separated values for the hashes, but now the actual passwords are contained in the second column. So basically what we looked at is relatively straightforward, but there didn't seem to be a whole lot of information on different blogs and forums that had answered this question. And so what we've done is we've looked at doing a hash dump, but having the hash dump go into the credentials table in the Metasploit database automatically, and then we've pulled those credentials out of the Metasploit database in a format that's suitable for passing to John the Ripper, run John the Ripper on the hashes to try to crack as many of them as we can, and then used the John show command to show the hashes that were cracked previously.